The kind of tired that settles into a man's bones isn't the kind that sleep fixes. Joel Maddox. Wait, let me check the names list first. Looking at the used names file, I can see the constraint clearly. Let me write the story now with fresh names. The kind of tired that lives in a man's hands is different from the kind that lives in his chest. Desmond Hale knew both. The kind in his hands was honest. Grease under the fingernails that soap couldn't fully reach. Knuckles that ached in cold weather from years of working in unheated garages. Calluses that had built up so gradually he couldn't remember when his palms had ever been smooth. That kind of tired he understood. He had made peace with it a long time ago. It was the other kind. The weight that had settled somewhere behind his sternum in the 3 years since Karen died, that he still hadn't found a language for. He didn't talk about it, not to the guys at the shop, not to his sister in Columbus, not to anyone. You learned after a while that people didn't really want to hear it. They wanted to hear that you were doing better, that things were getting easier, that your daughter was doing well in school, and you had found a rhythm, and life was moving forward. And all of those things were true, in their way. Lily, his daughter, 7 years old, missing her 2 front teeth, possessed of opinions about everything from breakfast cereal to the proper way to fold a blanket, was doing well in school. There was a rhythm. Life was moving forward. It just moved forward the way a car moves forward, with a slow leak in one tire. You could drive it, you could get where you were going, but you were always aware of the pull. He was 41 years old. He had been working as a diesel mechanic since he was 22, first at a fleet yard outside of Cincinnati, then at a regional logistics company in Dayton, and for the last 6 years at Kellner Transport, where he had worked his way up from line mechanic to lead technician, without any formal credential beyond a 2-year associate's degree and an ability to diagnose engine problems. The way some people read faces, quickly, intuitively, accurately. His supervisor, a thick-necked man named Gus, who smelled permanently of coffee and transmission fluid, called him the best wrench in the building and meant it as the highest compliment he knew how to give. Desmond accepted it as such. He had learned not to want more than what he was given. That was, until the posting went up for the regional maintenance director position. He saw it on the company intranet on a Tuesday morning in February, standing in the break room with a paper cup of bad coffee, still wearing his work jacket because the building's heat had been running slow. The title was different from anything he had applied for before. The salary was nearly double what he made. The responsibilities included overseeing maintenance operations across 4 facilities, coordinating with fleet managers, developing compliance protocols. It was, in short, the kind of job that people with engineering degrees applied for. Desmond did not have an engineering degree. He stood there for a long moment, reading the posting twice. And then he pulled out his phone and photographed it and went back to his bay. He didn't tell anyone. He thought about it for 3 days. He thought about it while he replaced a fuel injector on a semi, while he listened to Lily read aloud from her chapter book in the evenings, while he lay in bed at night and stared at the ceiling in the particular way he had developed since the house became quieter than it used to be. On the 4th day, he submitted an application. He did it without ceremony, sitting at his kitchen table after Lily had gone to bed, the house quiet around him, the blue light of the laptop the only light in the room. He wrote his cover letter carefully. He was honest about his credentials. He was also honest about what he had done. The efficiency protocols he had implemented at the Dayton facility that reduced diagnostic downtime by 31%. The maintenance schedule he had redesigned that extended fleet lifespan across the board. The training program he had built from scratch for new technicians that was still in use. He said what he was and what he had done and what he believed he could do, and then he hit submit and closed the laptop and sat in the dark for a moment before going to bed. He expected nothing. He told himself he expected nothing, and mostly he believed it. 2 weeks later, he received an email asking him to come in for an interview. The night before the interview was a Thursday. Lily had a sleepover at her friend's house. Megan's, a girl from her class whose mother was kind and whose house was loud and whose presence in Lily's life was one of the things Desmond was genuinely grateful for. He dropped Lily off at 6, drove back to the apartment, changed his shirt twice, and then decided he needed to eat something because he hadn't eaten since noon, and his hands were starting to feel the specific lightness that came from low blood sugar and low-grade anxiety. There was a bar and grill about 8 blocks from the apartment called Farley's. It was not a particularly notable establishment. The food was decent, the lighting was low, and the booths in the back were the kind where you could sit and think without feeling conspicuous about it. Desmond had eaten there half a dozen times over the years. He ordered a burger and a beer he didn't particularly want and put his phone face down on the table and tried to think about something other than the interview. He was mostly unsuccessful. He was on his second glass of water when he noticed the couple at the bar. Not immediately. It registered the way things register when you're not looking for them. A sound that doesn't fit, a posture that catches your peripheral vision without announcing itself. The woman was maybe 35, dressed in the kind of understated, well-cut way that suggested she had come from something professional earlier in the day. She was sitting with her back slightly angled away from the man beside her, which was itself a kind of body language. The language of someone who has decided they want to be somewhere else, but hasn't yet found the exit. The man beside her was talking. He was talking in the way some men talk when they have had 3 drinks and have become convinced they are fascinating, leaning in, touching her arm, not noticing or not caring when she drew it back. He was saying something that made her smile in a way that did not reach her dull eyes, which was its own kind of answer. Desmond watched this for a moment and then looked back at his phone. It wasn't his business. He knew that. People navigated uncomfortable situations all the time, and most of them didn't want a stranger inserting himself into the middle of it. He looked at the menu he had already ordered from, and then he looked up again. The man had moved closer. The woman had turned further away. She was looking at her phone with a studied concentration that was not actually about whatever was on her phone. Her jaw was set in a particular way that Desmond recognized, not from Karen, exactly, but from every woman he had ever known who was trying to hold it together in a public place while also looking for an escape that wouldn't make a scene. He set his napkin on the table and stood up. He walked over to the bar without a clear plan, which was unusual for him. He was, by temperament and by trade, a man who diagnosed before he acted. But sometimes you made a decision from a place below the level of analysis, and you sorted it out afterward. He stopped a few feet away from them, and he said, with the specific lightness of someone who had just spotted an old friend, "Hey, I thought that was you. I'm sorry I'm late." The woman looked up. There was a fraction of a second in which he could see her reading the situation. This man she had never seen before, the escape route he was offering, the question of whether to take it. It was a very short fraction of a second. She said, "Oh, hi, I was starting to wonder." The man beside her turned. He was bigger than Desmond had registered from across the room, and his expression was the particular expression of someone whose evening had just been interrupted in a way they considered a personal insult. He said, "You know this guy?" The woman was already standing, picking up her jacket from the back of the stool. She said, with a calm that Desmond found quietly impressive, "We go way back. I'm sorry, we made plans. I should have said something earlier." The man held Desmond's gaze for a moment with the specific hostility of someone deciding whether to push it. Desmond met it with a steadiness that communicated neither aggression nor apology. He had worked in shops and yards with difficult men for 20 years. He knew how to stand still in a way that discouraged escalation. The man said something under his breath and turned back to his drink. Desmond and the woman walked toward the door. Outside, the February air was cold and sharp. They stood on the sidewalk under the awning, and the woman took a breath that was, even at one remove, a relief. She said, "I don't know how to thank you." He said, "You don't have to." She looked at him directly for the first time. She had dark eyes and an expression that was trying to decide whether to be embarrassed or amused, and was landing somewhere between the two. She said, "That was a completely unhinged thing for a stranger to do." "Probably," he said. "In a good way," she added. He nodded. He put his hands in his jacket pockets. He said, "Are you okay? Do you need me to call someone or?" "I'm fine," she said. "I have a car. I just needed an exit." She said it with a small, rueful laugh. "First date. App date. Should have known." He said, "I'm sorry." She shook her head. "Not your fault." She pulled her jacket tighter against the cold and then extended her hand. "I'm Elena." He shook it. "Desmond." She looked at him for a moment. "Well," she said. "Desmond, thank you. I mean it." He said, "It was nothing. Drive safe." She walked toward the parking structure down the street, and he went back inside and paid his bill and finished his burger. And that was the whole of it. He did not ask for her number. He did not think about her in the particular way that a story like this might lead you to expect. He thought about the interview, and about Lily, and about the specific quiet of the apartment waiting for him on the other side of the night, and then he went home and went to sleep. The interview was at 9 in the morning on the 14th floor of the Kellner Transport Regional Headquarters, in a conference room that smelled of carpet cleaner and new furniture. Desmond arrived 12 minutes early, which was his habit. He wore the dark gray blazer he had bought for Karen's brother's wedding 6 years ago, and had worn perhaps 4 times since, a white shirt, dark trousers. He looked like what he was, a man who worked with his hands and had dressed as carefully as he knew how for an occasion that mattered. He sat in a chair in the hallway outside the conference room and waited. At 9 o'clock exactly, the door opened. The woman who held it was wearing a charcoal suit jacket and had her dark hair pulled back in a way that was entirely professional and entirely different from how it had been the night before, loose around her shoulders in the dim light of a bar, while February moved past the windows. She stopped when she saw him. He stopped in a different way, the way you stop when something that should not make sense suddenly does. They looked at each other. After a moment, she said, in a voice that was perfectly level, "Mr. Hale," he said. "Yes." She stepped back from the door and held it open. Her expression gave away nothing to anyone who might have been watching. To Desmond, it gave away a question, not an awkward one, but a careful one, the kind you ask yourself before you decide how to proceed. He walked through the door. There were 3 other people in the room. A man from HR whose name Desmond immediately forgot. A fleet operations manager named Todd who seemed deeply tired of being there. And a woman in her 50s introduced as the regional VP of logistics, whose name was Patricia Wen, and who had the specific quiet authority of someone who had been in rooms like this one for a very long time. Elena was the 4th. She was introduced as Elena Marsh, Director of Infrastructure and Operations. She shook his hand across the table with the clean formality of a first introduction. He met her grip and said, "Nice to meet you," and meant it in the way that covered more than its face value. They sat down. The interview began. It was, in structure, a conventional one. The HR man asked about his background. Todd asked about his practical experience with multi-site coordination. Patricia Wen asked 2 questions that were specifically designed to find the edges of his knowledge, and watched him with a stillness that he found oddly more comfortable than the other interviewer's casual manner. She was being honest about the fact that she was evaluating him, which he preferred to the performance of friendliness. He answered Deckling. He answered everything directly. He did not oversell. When Todd asked about his experience with federal compliance documentation, he said that it was an area where he would need support initially, but named specifically what he already knew and what he understood about the gaps. Patricia Wen made a small note. Then Elena Marsh asked him a question. She had said very little up to that point. She had watched, mostly with an attention that he recognized as real listening rather than the performance of it. Now she folded her hands on the table and said, in a voice that gave nothing away, "Tell me about a time when you saw something that was clearly wrong, but it wasn't your responsibility to fix it." What did you do? The room was quiet. Desmond looked at her for a moment. She looked back at him. Her expression was neutral with a precision that only made sense to him because he already knew what was underneath it, he said. I was a line technician at a fleet yard in Dayton. We had a driver, long haul, 15 years with the company, bring in a truck that had a brake pressure issue. The diagnostic was my job. The sign-off was my supervisor's job. I did the diagnostic, flagged the issue, filed the report. My supervisor signed off on it as a minor variance, cleared the truck for the road. He paused. He was wrong. I knew he was wrong. The truck shouldn't have gone out. Patricia Wen had set down her pen. I went back to my supervisor and told him again specifically. He told me to stay in my lane. I went to his supervisor. Took me 2 days to find the right person, but I found them. The truck was pulled. The brakes were rebuilt. The driver did another 160,000 miles in that vehicle without incident. He said it plainly, without drama. He said, "It wasn't my responsibility to push it. But a man's life was on that road, and that seemed more relevant than the org chart." The room was quiet for another moment. Todd nodded slowly. Patricia Wen made another note. Elena said, "Thank you." The interview continued for another 20 minutes. At the end, Patricia Wen thanked him for his time. Todd handed him a business card. The HR man said they would be in touch. Elena walked him to the elevator. They stood in the hallway, and when the elevator doors closed at the far end and they were briefly, incidentally alone, she said, in a voice that was quiet and without performance, "You didn't tell them it was a coincidence, that we'd met?" "No," he said. "Why?" He thought about it. He said, "Because I didn't want you to have to wonder if it affected anything. And I didn't want to have to wonder either." She looked at him for a moment. Something in her expression shifted, not dramatically, just the way a room changes when you open a window. She said, "For what it's worth, the answer you gave about the brake system." She paused. "That's the answer people with 30 years of management experience don't give, because they've learned not to." He said, "I haven't learned that yet." She said, "I know." The elevator arrived. He stepped in and turned around. She was already walking back toward the conference room, her heels quiet on the carpet, her posture the posture of someone with more to do and not enough hours in the day. The doors closed. He picked Lily up from Megan's house at noon. She was wearing someone else's sweatshirt and had a temporary tattoo of a butterfly on her left forearm and was still mid-sentence from a conversation she'd been having inside when the door opened. He buckled her into the back seat, and she talked without pause for 11 minutes about the movie they had watched and the pancakes Megan's mom had made, and the fact that Megan had a dog named Biscuit who had slept on her feet, and she had not minded at all. Actually, she had loved it, and could they get a dog? He said, "Maybe." She said, "You always say maybe." He said, "Maybe means maybe." She accepted this with the specific patience of a child who has learned that maybe is better than no. He drove and listened to her and thought about the elevator doors closing and the way Elena Marsh had walked back down the hall, and he decided not to think about it too much. He was a man who had learned to be careful about the things he let himself want. The job was one thing. He had done what he could do. The outcome belonged to the process now, and the process would take whatever time it took. He was good at waiting. He had learned. The call came on a Wednesday 8 days later. It was Patricia Wen, not HR. He registered that first. The directness of it, the fact that she had called herself. She told him the position was his, that the offer letter would come via email by end of day, that she expected him to have questions about the transition timeline, and he should call Todd with those. He said, "Thank you. I'll review the letter." She said, "One more thing." There was a brief pause. "Elena Marsh was the one who championed your candidacy when there was internal debate about the credential gap. I thought you should know that." He said, "I appreciate you telling me." She said, "Your answer about the brake system was the most honest thing she'd heard in a conference room in 3 years." Another brief pause. I agreed with her assessment. They ended the call. He stood in the parking lot of the shop for a moment, the February air cold around him. the sound of a truck engine turning over somewhere in the bay behind him. He called his sister in Columbus. She cried, which embarrassed them both, and he told her it was just a job, and she said it wasn't just a job, and he knew she was right. He went back inside and finished his shift. On his first day in the new position, he arrived early, earlier than he needed to, which was also his habit. He was standing at the coffee station on the 14th floor when Elena came through the main doors at 7:40, a tote bag over one shoulder, a travel mug in her other hand, moving with the particular efficiency of someone already several steps into a workday that hadn't technically started yet. She saw him. They had not spoken since the elevator. She stopped at the coffee station beside him and poured a cup with the ease of someone who used this machine every morning. She did not make anything of seeing him there. She said, "The facility in Lexington is going to give you the most trouble initially. Their maintenance logs are about 14 months behind." He said, "I'll go there first." She said, "That's what I would do." She picked up her cup and her bag and started down the hallway. After a few steps, she paused without turning around, as though she had remembered something. She said, "Lily?" He had not told her about Lily. He thought back and was certain of it. He had not mentioned his daughter that night outside the bar. He said, "How did you?" She turned then, and there was something in her expression that was not quite a smile, but was in the same neighborhood. She said, "Your jacket pocket. Thursday night. You pulled out your phone and there was a drawing on it, the back of it, crayon butterfly." He thought about this. He said, "She draws on everything." Elena said, "How old?" 7. She nodded once as though filing this away. She said, "Good." And then she went down the hallway and around the corner, and the sound of her footsteps faded, and Desmond was left standing there with his coffee in a building that was going to be his building now, thinking about a 7-year-old who drew butterflies on the back of her father's phone and didn't know yet what any of this meant. He drank his coffee. It was, on the surface, a completely ordinary morning. Two people who had met under strange circumstances finding a professional rhythm in a hallway. That was the whole of what had happened, and also it was not the whole of anything, and both of them knew that too, in the way you know the things you decide not to say yet. He went to find his office. The door had his name on it already. It was the small things that got you, not the big ones. Not the offer letter or the phone call or the conference room. It was the name on the door, plain and unhurried, as though it had been there all along and was simply waiting for him to arrive. Desmond stood in the hallway and looked at it for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he opened the door and walked in.